Hey guys, good morning. Okay, so this is a close read of Scarlet Ibis. And before we even begin in your lexicon, you need to make sure you have the following words in your lexicon. You should have setting, figurative language, foreshadowing, and symbols. Okay, so those are the four we're focusing on for this short story. If you didn't work on your lexicon yesterday, that's okay, but you want to add these four because that's the focus of this lesson. Okay, so before we begin, I want to tell you that a scarlet ibis, an ibis is I almost said a tree, it's a bird, and scarlet means red. So we're talking about a red bird. Okay, so I'm going to read it to you first, and then we're going to go back and we're going to look at the annotations. Because we're only doing the first two paragraphs, we can read it all first and then go back and look. Okay, so here we go. It was in the close season, summer was dead, but autumn had not yet been born, and that the ibis lit in the bleeding tree, the flower garden was strained with rotten brown magnolia petals, and ironweeds grew rank amid the purple phlox. The 5 o'clocks by the chimney still marked the time, but the oriole nest in the elm tree was untenanted and rocked back and forth like an empty cradle. The last graveyard flowers were blooming, and their smell drifted across the cotton field and through every room of our house, speaking softly the names of our dead. It's strange that all this is still so clear to me, now that summer has long gone since fled, and time has just had its way. A grindstone stands where the bleeding tree stood, just outside the kitchen door, and now it's an oriole sings in the elm tree. Its song seems to die in the leaves, silver dust. The flower garden is prim, the house a gleaming white, and the pale fence across the yard stands straight and spruce. But sometimes, like right now, as I sit in the cool green draped parlor, the grindstone begins to turn, and time, with all its changes, is ground away. And I remember Doodle. Doodle was just about the craziest brother a boy ever had. Of course, he wasn't crazy like Miss Leedy, who was in love with President Wilson and wrote him a letter every day. But he was a nice crazy, like someone you'd meet in a dream. He was born when I was 6, and was from the outset a disappointment. He seemed all head and with a tiny body, which was shred and shriveled like an old man's. Everybody thought he was going to die, except Aunt Nancy, who had delivered him. She said he would live because he was born in a caul, and cauls were made from Jesus' nightgown. Daddy had Mr. Hearth, the carpenter, build a little mahogany coffin for him. But he didn't die. And when he was 3 months old, Mama and Daddy decided they might as well name him. They named him William Armstrong, which is kind of like tying a big tail on a small kite. Such a name sounds good only on a tombstone. All right, so there are some things that should stand out automatically to you. There's a lot of things that stand out upon the first read, and I'm going to write them here where it says type here. So there's a lot of references to nature. There's a lot of references to red. We know about Doodle, who is the younger brother. We know it's in flashback because he's talking about what happened in the past. His brother almost died. They built a coffin for him and then put it away when it didn't. And then they gave him a real long name, which was William Armstrong, which he says only belongs on a tombstone, which is really interesting, I think, because that is a form of foreshadowing. So, spoiler alert, a lot of writers will do this without us even knowing it, but when he says something like, such a name sounds good only on a tombstone. So they call him Doodle all of his life, and throughout this book, we're going to see that they call him Doodle, okay? But he tells us from the outset that the name William Armstrong sounds good only on a tombstone. So what does that indicate to us? only on a tombstone infers Doodle will die. And that is true. Doodle will die in the story. I know. I told you, spoiler alert. But if you were reading closely, you probably found some other things that showed us that. Now, if we go back up here to look at what our annotations are, we're not going to have to write that down all the time. We're going to highlight in pink anything that refers to red or death. Red is obviously important because the name of the story is the Scarlet Ibis. So that's important. We talked about nature and how nature is important in this, and it is. It's a really important part of the story. So we're going to highlight that in green. And because we've been going over figurative language, which is in your lexicon, we want to highlight that in yellow. And foreshadowing, which tells us what's going to happen. It's the way the author leads us to know those things. That this is an example of foreshadowing. And last is going to be any words that repeat themselves. Oh, and I forgot symbols. So before I go on, I wanted to draw your attention to one thing that is almost always symbols are seasons. And I'm writing that right down here. You can see it. Seasons are symbols. So we have spring, summer, fall or autumn, and winter. So if we think of those as stages of man, we can think of spring. Think of spring, what happens in spring. We've got the sprouting of vegetables and flowers. And if we think about leaves, this is when all of the leaves are green and they're young. So basically, spring is like a birth. Okay, and summer, everything's bright and it's summer and you might get burned if you get, if you're out in the sun too long. It's when you're playing, when you're having fun. So this is youth. And then autumn is when things start to die away and they start, hiding, or squirrels, are going to hibernate for the winter, the leaves die. So this is like sort of like midlife. And then winter, everything is quiet and it goes very much, the things that would have been out in nature are dead. So this is old age / death. Okay, so those are symbols. So we want to make sure we look for those things, and Hurst gives us those things in the outset, in the very, 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 very beginning of the actual writing. He says it was the clove. Now, if we were together, we'd be doing this together. Clove means in between. So the in between two things. In this case, he uses clove. The word clove is a metaphor, which we're going to highlight in yellow, because the clove of a tree is like where you have a tree that splits into, like it has two limbs. That's the clove. Okay, so in this case, he's talking about the clove of two seasons. He tells us the clove of the summer, which we said is youth, and autumn, which is old age. Okay, so we're going to highlight that in blue. So what that tells us is that it's between these two. So if we're between those two and we're looking at those as symbols, it's between youth and old age. So we know that some facts that we know is that Doodle was born when the narrator was 6, which is right here. Okay, so that means that he's, at this point, he's not just 6 anymore. We can at least know that he's older than 3 months because they built the coffin and they got rid of it, and they named him William Armstrong. So we know that he's at least 6, but probably older than that. And once you guys get into some older paragraphs or other paragraphs, he's probably, I would say between 4 and 6 would be Doodle. So that would put him between 10 and 14, which is when we start going into summer, right? Okay, so that's one of our biggest symbols so far. All right, so the next thing we want to look for is anytime we have anything referring to red or dead. So we've got the word dead right here, so we're going to highlight that in pink. And then if we read, we got the ibis is lit in the bleeding tree. Okay, we're going to highlight that in pink. We've got the flower garden. Let's see, what else? There's a lot of pink in here. I just got or red. I've got to find it. See if you can find some. As you find it, go ahead and highlight it. There's bleeding again. Okay, so if I let it go the whole time I was looking for all of the things we had to annotate, it'd take a long time. So this would be like a 50-minute video, and I don't want to make you watch for 50 minutes. So anyway, I went through and I got all of the ones that I picked up, which were dead, bleeding, rotting, because like things that are rotting are death, empty cradle, graveyard, dead, bleeding, die, red, die, and mahogany. So just looking at this front page, we got a lot of red, right? So if you guys didn't annotate ever, you probably wouldn't even really recognize that red and death was brought up that much. So when we have this particular thing back here where it says good only on a tombstone, it's not just right here that it's indicated. It's all in here. We've got all of this death and blood, right? Or red. Okay, so that is one thing. The next thing is symbols. So anything that would be a symbol for death. So we already talked about autumn. We talked about other things. So the fact that there is, let's see, the graveyard itself. I'm going to highlight that right beforehand so we know that that is definitely some foreshadowing. We have the tombstone itself. Oh, that should be in purple. My bad. Purple. Okay. We have some other things. We've got speaking softly, the names of our dead. Okay, now that's important. That is a huge inference. Now there's another clue in here where it talks about Aunt Leedy, and Aunt Leedy is talking about President Eisenhower, right? Oh, not Aunt Leedy, Miss Leedy. She's talking about President Wilson, my bad. Okay, so take a second, look that up, and see when that would have been. Okay, did anybody get it? He was President Wilson was president. I'm going to put Wilson president. Oops. President from 1913 to 1921. So this gives us a time frame, right? So 1913 was a very, very important time in our history. Anybody know what big thing happened in 1913, ended in 1917? Killed a lot of people? That would be World War I. Okay, so World War I, well, it's kind of in the midst of that time frame, right? So when we have speaking softly the names of our dead, what is Hearst probably referring to here? Speaking softly, that would be like the wind. So the wind is going through the hallways in the house, and it whispers the names of their dead. So the names of all of the people who have used to live in this house that have died either because they're old or, more specific, probably because they died in the war. Okay, so this is a family who has seen a lot of loss. And so we also have that, which is implying to us that something bad's going to happen because it already has. Okay. So the other thing that's important about that is that we've got this war that's going on between the worlds. So it's a world war between two sides, the Triple Entente and the Alliance. So you've got two things fighting against each other, and what do we call that? Conflict. That's right. Okay, so we have that between the two brothers. So the war between the two brothers is very similar to the sniper, but is also similar to the World War. Okay, so let's look for other foreshadowing things. I'm going to hit it on pause and let you guys go ahead and do it, although it's going to play straight through, so I'll be back in a second. Okay, so I'm back and I've highlighted some things in purple. Now I probably missed some things, but that's okay. Nobody's perfect. Nobody gets every single thing annotated. That's the whole point. Why we do it together. Okay, so I've highlighted in purple the last graveyard flowers. Those, that's a foreshadowing of death. Speaking softly the names of our dead. A call, just so you know, a call is actually, it's kind of gross actually, but it's part of when a baby is born, part of the lining of the woman's uterus is around the baby's head. So a baby could actually die from that unless there is a physician or a midwife or somebody like that there to remove it, because it would cut off their oxygen. So that's what Aunt Nicey means when she refers to it as comes from Jesus's nightgown. So from the outset, the brother says that he's a disappointment, but Aunt Nicey says that he's special. So we know about that, and we also know that this is important because they thought that he was going to die before he got too old, which is why they made a coffin. Okay, we also know that because of that they didn't think he was going to make it past 3 months old, because he was born in a caul, because of all of those things, that he's special, and he's probably weak to some degree. Okay, so that's gonna tell us a lot as well. Okay, so we got some foreshadowing done. Now we need to go through and do settings. So anything referring to setting, specifically nature, because that is huge in the story. And there's a lot of nature. So we've got our seasons, those are nature. We've got the tree, that's nature. Flower garden, that's nature. Magnolia petals, also nature. What else you got? Okay, I'm going to pause it. We'll come back and we'll see what we got. Okay, so the opening of the story really has a lot to do with nature. Now, remember, we're doing setting, not just nature, but this story has a lot to do with nature. And we're going to talk about that when it comes back to these guys, the seasons as well. But I also highlighted Love with President Wilson because that gives us a time frame. Okay, so and setting is part of time and place. So we've also got right here, we've got summer. I'm going to just highlight that a little bit with green, a little bit with blue. So we know what time it takes place. It takes between summer and autumn, which is like right before you go to school. It's that time period where like that, some people call it an Indian summer, where it's like not quite cool, but not quite hot. In the day it might be hot, and the night it might be cold. It's at that time period. So it's that weird time period or a time frame where it's between things, okay? And that's exactly what's going on here. So we have all of these flowers and all of these things. We've got a lot of color referenced here. So we've got, this is our setting. We know that it takes place, this reminder or this flashback takes place shortly after World War II. And we know that he's got a crazy brother, all of that other stuff. And we know that he's going to die. He's finna die. All right. So the next thing we want to do is we want to look for figurative language. So we're looking for all metaphors, similes, hyperboles, and personification. So when we first read, it was in the clove of the seasons of summer. Okay, and actually the clove, the reason I highlighted that is because clove is like a tree. So summer and winter isn't really literally, there's not a clove of summer and winter. That is a metaphor for the change, the in-between. That the ibis, okay, and then had not yet been born. Okay, so the clove hadn't been born. A clove is a time or a change and cannot be born. So that is personification. That the ibis lit in the bleeding tree, the flower garden was strained with rotting brown magnolia petals. Okay, maybe could be. I'm gonna highlight it because it could be strained, but I think strained is generally a human quality. Brown magnolia petals and ironweeds grew rank, and they could smell. So, because flower and foliage smell, especially when it's rotting. Amid the purple phlox, the 5 o'clock by the chimney still marked time. So chimney can't mark time. So we're gonna highlight that in yellow because it's figurative language. But the oriole nest in the elm was untenanted. So that means untenanted means vacant. There's no renters, which just means there's no birds in it. And rocked back and forth like an empty cradle. Okay, so that like gives us, it's a simile. So we definitely want to highlight that one. And then we've got the last graveyard flowers were blooming, and their smell drifted across the cotton field and through every room of our house, speaking the softly, blah, blah, blah. That is which figurative language? Can the smell speak? No, so that makes it personification. Very good. So that is just the beginning of our figurative language. I'm going to pause it and we'll see what you get. Hold on. Okay, so I went through and I did some figurative language, and here's what I found. So speaking softly, has long since fled, summer can't flee. Leaves are not dust. Leaves obviously are leaves, but the silvery dust gives us the impression that they're old or they're dying or they're somehow a memory. Time can't be ground away. Miss Leedy is crazy. So he's comparing Doodle to Miss Leedy. He's not crazy like Miss Leedy. He's like someone you would meet in your dreams. He looked like an old man, his body and his head. And then calls were made up of Jesus's nightgown is a metaphor, like Jesus's nightgown is like a call, and that the name is like tying a big tail on a small kite. So those are all examples of figurative language. Okay, so we've gone through and we've done anything that is red or death. We've done setting, figurative language, foreshadowing, and symbols. We haven't done all of the symbols, but we've got some of them. Definitely our flowers that die, those are symbols. Symbols that anyway foreshadow Doodle's death. So like the mahogany coffin, the tombstone at the end, all of those things would be other examples of symbols, and that's what you're going to want to write over here. Okay, so these wouldn't be highlighted anymore. What I want to say also about the seasons isn't just that it has to do with symbols of age, it also has to do with life and death as well. So, which, obviously has to do with age, but things change, but they come back to life kind of thing. So that's sort of a rebirth idea. And then you want to go through and underline any words that repeat. So we have the word bleeding. Bleeding repeats several times because he's referring to the bleeding tree, right? So we're going to underline that. I'm going to actually bold it too. You don't have to bold it if you don't want to. And then if you look at some of the other words, what are some other words that repeat? What do you got? Die. Fortunately, that one's highlighted, so that one's easy. Die is down here. Okay. Go ahead and take a look. What else do you got? Okay, so I've gone ahead and bolded and underlined all of the words that repeat that I found. Again, you probably found some other ones. But if we look at this annotation, and this is the reason we annotate, is because we want to look at the words that are used that the author has purposely put into a short story and look at the words that jump out. Okay, so if we're just looking at the colors of those words, we can get a really colorful idea of what this whole story is about. Okay, so we've got summer, we got seasons, we got flowers, bleeding, garden, crazy, we got Jesus's nightgown, we've got lots of things. So we know that there's going to be religion of some sort in here because of Nicey. We know that we've got our time period, which is just after World War I, brain fart. We know that there's a lot to do with nature, and nature is important because nature, like our seasons, has a natural progression of, living and then dying and living and dying. And in that cycle, a lot of things happen and people change and people get older, and the different age things that happen to us and the coming of age. And that is one of the things that this story is called. It's a coming of age story. So it's that clove of the seasons. It's that time where you used to have something and now you don't. So like when you remember what it was like to be a kid, but now you're not as innocent as you used to be, that is a coming of age story. So this is a coming of age story, and he tells us from the beginning because it's the clove of seasons. So it's the clove of his life. Okay, so the next thing it asks you to do is infer and predict what will happen in the story based on the passage alone. Explain your prediction using at least 2 pieces of evidence, quotes from the text in your extended response. Your response must be at least 7 to 10 sentences in order to receive credit. So I've done all of the hard work. Just kidding. The writing is the hard work. But we went through and did all of this annotating. So basically what I want you to tell me is, what do you think is going to happen? So if you want to put that you think that Doodle's going to die, which he does, you can put that. But now you got to give me some proof about why you think he's going to die. Is there anything else that you think might happen based on this story? And if you think it might happen, using your inference clues, make sure you cite. Okay, so that's what your annotations should look like. And when you guys have annotated, they're not quite as annotated as much as this. This is called a close read annotation. When we do close reads, we really dive into it. So we can really see what we need to look at. So we can get the plot of the story, and that's important. But when we really need to focus on some important things, we really need to hone in. And that's what we've done here with this close read, is we've really annotated and honed in on some things. So you should have all of these annotations and your own. Hopefully you can just copy these and then you can write your extended response there. Okay, so I'm sorry this was a longer video, but I really wanted to get into the close read and how we get those annotations and how important they are, and we make sure we got all of the major ones. If you have other ones, I need you to tell me, because I need to add them to mine. All right, so that's Annotating 101. This is your assignment, but if you went ahead with me and highlighted everything, the annotation part is done. All you have to do is do the writing. Okay, I'll see you guys later. Thanks.